Hello, everybody, and welcome in. This is Aaron St. Dennis, the FF Mad Scientist, and welcome back to another episode of the Mad Science Lab podcast. Tonight, we are going to be doing the season finale of Sleepers, Breakouts, and Busts. And since it's the season finale, I couldn't just bring in anyone. So I brought in a very special guest to close it out. That would be Football Guy's own Dave Kluge. Dave, thank you for joining me, man. I appreciate it. How's it going?
It's going good, man. Thanks a lot for having me. I was a little bummed out to miss the expo this weekend, but looks like everybody had a great time there. Got to see some pictures of everyone smiling, laughing, having a good time, and looking forward to making it back again next year.
It's funny. You were one of the people on my list. I was walking around with my list going, oh, is he here? No, haven't met him yet. Where is it? So you were on my list of people. And then when I got to you, I said, you weren't at the expo, were you? There's a few people where I don't remember meeting them, but I met them. And there's a few people who weren't there. Good story was, this was Saturday night. I was sitting at the stadium there. We're all having drinks and I'm standing there probably 20 minutes just next to some guy. And we're talking. And I say to my buddy next to me, I said, hey man, have you seen Thor Nystrom? He's still on my list. I haven't seen him. And all of a sudden I hear, I've been standing next to you for the last 15 minutes. He's shaved. I didn't even recognize him. I looked up, I turned his name tag around. I'm like, holy shit, Thor. He's like, you've been talking to me for like 20 minutes. Didn't even recognize him. So
that's how it goes too. The one I made a joke last year before the expo. I said, for all of you expo first timers, nobody is the height that you think they are. And I don't know if you had that same experience, but everybody that I met, if I thought somebody was tall, they were short. If I thought somebody was short, they were tall. Everybody is a completely different height than you have imagined in your head.
Yes, exactly. My theory was next year on the badges, they have to put the little QR code for your Twitter on the damn name tag. Yep. So I can just scan it. And, the worst was people, I swear, the whole weekend I introduced myself by shaking my hand and going, what's the name on your name? You never realize, it's like, I know you, I don't know what your name is. I've seen you 100 times. And
yep.
I had one where I've talked to the guy. He was from Player Profiler. I've talked to him 100 times, had him on my show Wednesday night, met him Thursday, couldn't remember his name. It's like, I was on your show last night. I'm like, well, alcohol. What do you want from me?
That's how it goes.
All right. Well, before we get into it, I'm sure everyone knows, but you want to take a second here to tell everyone where they can find you and your wonderful work.
Yeah, it's real simple these days. You can find everything at Football Guys, where I am exclusive nowadays. We just recently launched the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show, myself and Alfredo Brown. I had the launch pad going for years. Alfredo was doing the pretend GM, and we would have each other on each other's shows. And we said, hey, I think we got a good thing going here. So we just kind of merged them together. We now have the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. You can find it at youtube.com/Football Guys. Still a relatively new show. We just released episode 9 this morning with Jamie Eisenberg at CBS Sports. But we'll have a new episode coming out Wednesday, just the two of us. So definitely check that out. It's been a really, really fun show to do with a good friend of mine.
That sounds awesome. He's a great dude. He was working the Football Guys booth there yesterday, making people shoot free throws with a tiny little basketball from 10 feet away. And I am, if you didn't get to meet me in person this weekend, I am about 5.5 feet tall and not particularly in great shape. Basketball is not my sport. So that went well. Yeah. But Alfredo was a great guy. So that seems like it would be a great mix. So I'm glad that's working out well for you. All right, let's fire right into it here. We have your first player. That would be if I could click on the right button. There we go. Your sleeper is Arizona wide receiver Hollywood Brown. Fantasy Pros has him projected as wide receiver 35. Negligible rushing stats projected. 78.5 receptions, 899.2 on the receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. Fantasy Pros, I have been finding throughout this series, is really freaking conservative on every projection. So for them to have him at almost 900 yards, that's really saying something about what they think his floor is. I've been treating Fantasy Pros as my floor projections because they have some guys where it's just ridiculously low. What is it about Hollywood Brown that has him as a sleeper for you?
Well, this guy was a ticking time bomb the entire time that he was in Baltimore, right? Like we knew that he had the profile of a really good wide receiver, but he was hamstrung by this Greg Roman offense where he just wasn't utilized the way that he should have been. And then we kept saying, especially like for dynasty players, we were saying this is the type of profile that you want to invest in. A guy like Marquise Brown who draws targets, he draws targets deep downfield, he scores touchdowns, he gets yards after the catch. He does all the things that we want to see from a premier wide receiver and just wasn't getting it done in the fantasy production column. Well, then he got traded to Arizona, and we saw it all come together, right? A high volume offense where he was pulling 10.7 targets per game to start the season. Now, this was obviously without DeAndre Hopkins and with a healthy Kyler Murray, but over that stretch, over a 6-game stretch, 10.7 targets per game, and he was the wide receiver 5 in PPR scoring behind just Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill. Pretty elite company to be a part of. Over that time, he was on pace for 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns, well above the projections that we were looking at there from Fantasy Pros. And now we see DeAndre Hopkins is officially out of the picture, and the stage is set for him to be that number 1 wide receiver target hog in Arizona. And you're getting them at a huge discount because of Kyler Murray's ACL. Now, there hasn't been a ton of talk out of camp. We got the reports about a month ago where Kyler Murray was saying that he wanted to play for week 1. Probably not going to happen, but I
No.
don't see a situation where he doesn't play this year. He could be back in early September, could miss the entire year, but I don't think that happens. If they're contending, which is unlikely, he's going to want to return. But the more likely situation is that they aren't contending and they say, "Hey, we want you out here so we can try to boost your trade value a little bit." Some leverage
Exactly.
in case we do want to pivot off of the quarterback here. Either way, I think we see Kyler Murray come back at some point this season. And right now, you can draft Marquise Brown as your wide receiver 3, maybe even wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, if you're leaning into a wide receiver heavy build. And even if the early part of the season with Clayton Tune or whoever it may be under center is looking a little bit bleak, you're drafting Marquise Brown with the hopes that Kyler Murray returns and he can put up similar production to what we saw last year at the start of the season. And I think Marquise Brown can be that late season hammer that is going to help win a lot of people fantasy football championships.
Yeah, with this ADP, I don't get what we're doing. Wide receiver 35, 78th overall on NFFC. Like George Pickens going above him. Well, unless your league gives you extra points for one-handed catches, I don't understand.
Or pancake blocks.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who it was, but somebody, you see that every day there's a George Pickens highlight out from training camp. And I don't remember who tweeted back, but they said, great, now show me one that's not blatant OPI. It's true. Was it? It was you. It was you. And I retweeted it. And I didn't want to say it in case it was.
By Steelers fans.
No, it was. I said thank you for like every single one of them is blatant OPI. It was like while we're on the Kyler Murray. Oh no, it wasn't. Sorry, it was Jordan Love. The other one was the Jordan Love touchdown where he does the sidearm, and someone who actually tried to use common sense said, if that's a real game, the defender doesn't stop and he hammers him for once again. It was you. Okay, so apparently I follow your Twitter.
I gotta wait for getting people riled up on Twitter. If you haven't noticed,
you're right. Heaven forbid you use common sense. It's a sack in OPI. It doesn't matter in the real season. So, and then you've got JSN here, who I love him as a rookie or his talent, but he's got tons of target competition. Hollywood Brown has what? Michael Wilson, the rookie. If he stays at this ADP, I'm all over him. I don't know how he's going this low.
And that's the thing. He's stayed at that ADP. I'm a sicko. All right. I start drafting my best ball teams in February. Like the Super Bowl is over, and I'm like, all right, we are looking at next year and we are drafting teams. And Marquise Brown's ADP has not budged. He has stayed there in that back end wide receiver 3 range all season. And I don't think it's out of the question that when Kyler Murray returns, he starts putting up wide receiver 1 numbers, especially if you look, quarterbacks, when they return from ACL injuries, their mobility is limited. And I think that you can make the argument either way. One, with a lack of mobility, maybe Kyler Murray isn't going to be able to scamper around and, make these plays that he does all the time. But I think people have this idea that like Kyler Murray is like Tim Tebow, that like all he can do is rush the ball. I think if anything, if Kyler Murray has to stay in the pocket and can't scramble as much, he's just going to pass more. And people, like I said, have this misconception that he is just a rushing quarterback. Kyler Murray is a phenomenal passer, one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. So if he can't scramble and he has to stay in the pocket and pass more, I think that just bodes even better for Marquise Brown and his outlook.
He should stay in the pocket and pass more. He's going to get himself killed running out there. We see it every year. He's got something that the shoulder and just he falls right off the map. But like, what other offensive weapons do they have here? James Conner, who's an injury waiting to happen. DeAndre Hopkins is gone. There's nobody else. Zach Ertz looks like he might be back, but can we trust Zach Ertz? Trey McBride? I don't understand how he's still going as wide receiver 35. I thought this would skyrocket after D-Hop was what was he cut and then signed elsewhere. It hasn't moved. He's just the forgotten man. But you're right, though. It's majorly a discount because, Clayton Tune's going to be the quarterback. Well, have you seen some of the other players on that list? Their quarterbacks aren't any better, and they have more target competition. So, oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Did you have anything else about Hollywood?
No, that's it, man. I just think that he's one of the best discounts out there right now. And, he is the unquestioned wide receiver one. I mean, he's going to pull a 28 to 32% target share in Arizona this year. And I don't even think that's debatable.
No, absolutely. We will move on here to your breakout, which may break my heart. I have some Ken Walker shares that were not thrilled about the Seahawks drafting a rookie running back. Fantasy Pros has him as RB37, 503.4 rushing yards and 3.2 touchdowns, 19.8 receptions, 164.3 receiving yards, and just under a single receiving touchdown. What is it about Charbonnet you like?
There's a lot that I like about Charbonnet. I mean, the landing spot, I'm not crazy about. When we were looking during the draft cycle, we were projecting him. Many pundits were projecting him to be a late first round pick. Remember, we were talking about him going to the Chiefs or going to the Bengals or one of those teams sitting at the end of the first round that could have used a guy like Charbonnet. Yep. And then he slid in the draft a little bit, but he has such a good profile. I mean, 6 foot, 214 pounds. He's got a big frame. We saw him in a 3-down role in college, and he has surprising abilities in the passing game. He pulled a 14.5% target share in college, which, straight from Player Profiler is in the 93rd percentile and also 3 times higher than Kenneth Walker. Now, Kenneth Walker has the speed advantage, and you'd expect that. He's a little bit smaller, but Charbonnet has the height, weight, burst, pass catching, and age advantage. So there's a realistic world, all right? And I love Kenneth Walker, but there's a realistic world where Kenneth Walker gets the early down work and all of the high value touches go Zach Charbonnet's way. He can be the goal line back. He can be the 3rd down back. And Kenneth Walker is relegated to the low volume stuff. And on top of that, he also has the injury away upside. If Kenneth Walker gets hurt, then Charbonnet is in a 3-down role. So I think he is one of those very rare guys. We talked about this for years with A.J. Dillon, and it never really worked out. But if you can find that guy that has standalone value with contingent upside, those are the guys that I love targeting in my fantasy drafts. And I think that the way that Charbonnet profiles to take on these high value touches, he has that standalone value and then also has the massive contingent upside where if something were to happen to get Kenneth Walker, God forbid, we're looking at Zach Charbonnet as a weekly top 12 running back.
I loved Walker, but this one scares the hell out of me. Not even for the 2 players. Pete Carroll, man, he just kills fan. Like, I could see him coming in and taking away goal line work, taking away all the pass volume, just completely ruining Walker, but yet kind of not being all that useful himself and being a brutal 2-headed backfield. Or I could see this being like Pete Carroll. Oh, psych, we just needed him for depth. He's just going to sit on our bench and do nothing. And anything in between. Pete Carroll is just a nightmare for fantasy. And when this happened, I absolutely hate this situation for both of them. I think it lowered both their volume.
Yeah. And it could also be one of those situations where we think we have a read on the situation. Like, okay, Kenneth Walker has been the guy for the last 3 weeks. And then you confidently plug Kenneth Walker in your lineup. And then just kidding. Zach Charbonnet's getting all the touches this week. And then you plug Zach Charbonnet in and then we're going back to Ken Walker. I mean, Pete Carroll is tough. He is terrible for fantasy. I mean, he's up there with Bill Belichick as far as the shenanigans that he plays and trying to read the tea leaves here. Yeah. But when I look at a situation like that, I would much rather invest a late pick in Zach Charbonnet than an early pick in Kenneth Walker.
Well, and if you look, I'll scroll up. Walker's going as RB17, 54th overall. Whereas, where was he? Zach Charbonnet, RB39, 109 overall. And if you look at the range here, you've got Rashad Penny, Samaje Perine, Jamal Williams, A-Chain, McKinnon. Right after, he's kind of like the break glass in case of emergency. After him, I don't know if there's a usable running back. I think I prefer him over A-Chain. I know he's the hotness out there in Miami. They just brought back, I know, small contract, old veterans, but they just brought them both back. I don't think the rookie just gets the entire backfield here in Miami, and it's kind of an ugly mess. And I would probably rather have Charbonnet. What do you think overall about, this range here just outside of 100 for running backs?
I think if we were guaranteed that every single player was going to play 17 games, then I'd probably prefer A Chain to Zach Charbonnet. But I think the contingent upside is what kind of gives me a little makes me a little bit more excited about Zach Charbonnet because A Chain, he's going to have big plays, and they've got that wide zone run scheme in Miami where he's going to be able to rip off huge plays on the outside. But if something happens, let's say, Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert both get hurt, Miami's going to sign a veteran. They're going to bring somebody in. A Chain doesn't have the build to be a 3-down back. Zach Charbonnet has that build where if something happens to Kenneth Walker, Seattle's not going to be scrambling trying to replace the running back. They're just going to give that whole workload to Charbonnet.
I'm kind of amazed Charbonnet is so far down. I would have thought this is kind of, again, it's not the same situation, but I see the Lions backfield as this. I get Jahmyr Gibbs is probably more talented, but I think Gibbs and Montgomery should be closer. I think Walker and Charbonnet should be closer. Like, not that close, but 54 to 1, what did I say, 109? I'm not sure they should be that many rounds. And obviously, like I said, Jahmyr Gibbs should be higher than Montgomery, but I don't think it should be 36 to 79 different. I don't understand with some of these backfields where we're not sure how the split's going to play out. Like, are you any more confident with Gibbs that he's gonna, be just render Montgomery completely irrelevant? How do you feel about them?
We'll get off on a little bit of a tangent here, but
Yeah,
I love Jahmyr Gibbs, man. I've got him as my RB9 in redraft rankings this year, which is way higher than I think a lot of people have him.
I do too, but like this year, Montgomery kind of worries me this year.
So I'm a Bears fan, and I think that a lot of people are going to be in for a rude awakening when they realize David Montgomery isn't that good of a running back.
Oh,
I think he was a league winner a couple of years ago, late in the
easy
season when he was
schedule.
like, yeah, he was like the RB1, beating up on Detroit and Seattle and these
Houston,
terrible,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but he's not really that good, and I think that people have this misconception that he is just going to walk into how many was it like 30 something, 40 something touches inside the 10 that Jamal Williams saw last year. I don't
Yeah,
think
and
that
17 touchdowns.
yeah, David Montgomery's not going to get that. That was a fluke. Jamal Williams had 17 more touches inside the 10-yard line than any other running back last year. Like that is a fluke. That's an outlier. You cannot bet on that to happen again. So I think that Jahmyr Gibbs is much better inside the red zone than people give him credit for because they look at his slight frame and they think that he can't do it. But we saw in the preseason they gave him work, near the end zone. And then on top of that, what he can do in the passing game. So I'm all in on Jahmyr Gibbs. My kind of macro level take on Jahmyr Gibbs is that if Bijan Robinson wasn't in this draft class, we'd be drafting Gibbs at like the 1-2 turn, like late first, early second round. But I think that because we already have Bijan Robinson as like the locked in RB3, RB4 in fantasy, people are nervous about putting another rookie inside their top 10. But when you look at running backs historically, they get the draft capital that Jahmyr Gibbs is, they basically have a floor of RB10 and a ceiling of being the overall RB1.
Yeah,
So, completely off on a tangent here. We were talking about Zach Charbonnet, but I love
sorry.
Jahmyr Gibbs, and he is one of my favorite targets. I'm glad we talked about it because Charbonnet and Gibbs are two of my most rostered running backs in fantasy this year.
So I'm going to assume at cost, if I give you the option of Montgomery at basically 80 or Charbonnet at 110, you're taking Charbonnet every time here.
Easily. And in my rankings, I actually have Charbonnet ahead of Montgomery. So the nice thing is I don't have to make that choice because there's such a wide gap, but I find
Yeah,
myself passing on Montgomery a lot, and I will reach for Charbonnet up to a round earlier if I have to.
I love it. All right, we got your final guy here. Your bust. I love to see this one, and you will not get any disagreement. We did some live drafts on the draft night out yesterday, and I had a friend that I was drafting along with her, and she ended up with this as her RB1 and the rest of her running back room. Oh, it gets better. Just wait. The rest of her running back room is Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift. That is her running back room. So we had some good talks. Oh, she is
One of them might hit. I mean,
She is repeatedly texting me to say, tell Dave Kluge I said hi. Tracy Norton from the league winners. So there I said it,
awesome.
Tracy. I have bothered him in the middle of the show while taking a cheap shot on your team from draft night out. So you
Love
asked
it.
for it.
Yeah, I
So
mean, well,
anyways,
we can talk about
yeah,
Rashad Penny. I mean, we won't, but I do like Rashad Penny. He's a guy that I've been beating the drum for a lot this offseason. I think he's talented. I love the landing spot, but obviously some injury concerns there. But on to Alexander Madison. I wrote an article recently. You can find it, Football Guys, called "Alexander Madison is the all capital the dead zone running back to avoid this year." I just want nothing to do with him. My kind of bigger big picture take on Alexander Madison is that we have spent so long pumping up Alexander Madison as an elite handcuff. Go out and trade for this guy in Dynasty, trade your third round picks for Alexander Madison. And then we saw him perform really well in small sample sizes. And I think over that time, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've just been conditioned to want to hype up Alexander Madison that people didn't really notice that his efficiency really fell off a cliff. I mean,
yeah,
over the last year, he was not good. And granted, it was on
no,
very small sample sizes, but there's so much context missing from Alexander Madison and his starts and what he has done. First of all, those all came under Mike Zimmer. And if you look at his usage when Dalvin Cook was on the field, Mike Zimmer gave Alexander Madison a lot more run when Dalvin Cook was healthy than Kevin O'Connell did last year. What that tells me is that Mike Zimmer liked Alexander Madison more than Kevin O'Connell did. On top of that, if you look at the 6 starts that he had, they came against Atlanta, Detroit, Seattle, Detroit, and Los Angeles. All right. 4 of those games were against some of the league's worst
yeah,
defenses.
yes, they were.
Detroit, 3 against Detroit and 1 against Seattle. And if you look in those games, Alexander Madison smashed
Yep.
103 rushing yards, 46 receiving yards, averaged over a touchdown per game, 26.1 fantasy points per game. And in the games where he had to play against good defenses, which were Atlanta and Los Angeles, both ranked 6th at the for run defenses that year, he had 33 rushing yards and 16 receiving yards, a very, very different story. So there's just so much context missing from the Alexander Madison discourse. And he is just a guy that I want nothing to do with.
No, I've been saying this all off season. When he was thrust into starters action, it was on short notice because Dalvin went out at the beginning of the game and they had no one else. He volumed his way to a top 5 finish on terrible efficiency. It was just brutal. And I get it. He played 5 games over the last 3 years and was a top 6 running back or whatever it is. He's not going to do that. I don't think they give him a 90% touch share like he was getting. Someone's going to mix in, McBride, Chandler, Wongwu, whoever it is. It's just not going to be as good. He can't face the Lions every week. He only gets them twice. So, and then you look at him here. He's RB 20, 67 overall. Miles Sanders, Akers, Dobbins, Damian Pierce, Rashad White. I don't think there's a single player here I wouldn't take over him. And I could probably scroll down to the 30s. Maybe AJ Dillon. How far do you think you could go down before you're willing to take Madison over one of these guys on the board?
Yeah, I've got him as my RB 28, and even there,
So
like, I don't feel that
Montgomery.
comfortable with him. I think
Yeah.
he's a replacement level player, and you mentioned some of these other guys, like Ty Chandler. I love Ty Chandler, and the team seems to like him, and they gave him a ton of run in the first preseason game, and injury is the reason we didn't see much of him last year, but last year he was getting steamed up in camp, and this year they're hyping him up as well. I love Kenny Nwangu. I mean, he's been relegated to a special teams role so far throughout his career, but I'm really hoping that we can see a little bit more of him. The one last thing I'll say about Alexander Madison here, it's really hard to draw historical comps, and everybody likes talking about Michael Turner, which is like the best case scenario. But I pulled historical comps for players that have had 4 to 8 starts in their first 4 seasons with 1,200 to 1,900 rushing yards. Very imperfect science here, but I thought that was like a good jumping off point to see some historical
Yep.
comps. Chester Taylor, Jerome Harrison, Mike Bell, James Starks, and Toby Gerhart.
Yeah, just
None of
take a
those guys
second and
ever went on to
Google
do
some of
anything.
those guys. Yeah, you got to Google most of those guys just to
And
know who
most
they
of them
are.
are out of the league by year 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So the future is not bright for Alexander Madison. Um, I think people have this idea that he is just going to step into Dalvin Cook's shoes and perform just as well as Dalvin Cook did, and I don't see it happening. If you look from 2019 to 2022, he has seen his yards per attempt, yards per target, yards per touch, yards after contact per attempt, breakaway run rate, broken tackle rate, yards per route run. They have all dipped, and he hit career lows across the board in 2022. And when you think about it, he was seeing fewer or less volume in 2022. So you'd think on less volume, you would be more efficient, but it was actually the opposite. He saw his littlest volume last year and was the least efficient with it. I'm worried that he is just dust at this point, and people are just assuming that he is going to take on this role week one and hold on to it for the entire 17-week season. I think even if he does start off the season with 25 touches in week one, it's only a matter of time before Ty Chandler, Kenny Nwangu, Dwayne McBride, one of these guys comes knocking and forces a committee.
You were exactly right, though. He's a replacement level player. Like I seen in a dynasty league with analysts and experts, so not just nobodies, people, the degenerates. He went for someone bought him for a first and a second. And I said, what are you doing? What do you do? Oh, well, he's going to be the lead back. Well, even if he is this year, you realize he's in his fourth year. And what is he now? Almost 26?
Yeah.
You're buying a guy who's never been a lead back, and you're buying him at basically just before the running back age apex. What the hell are you doing? Like, this has Mike Davis 2.0 written all over it.
Mike Davis 2.0, Chase Edmonds 2.0. Like, we're trying to project volume on a guy who isn't good. That is just that's how you identify these dead zone running backs that you want to avoid. And Alexander Mattison perfectly fits that profile.
Absolutely. Just a replacement level dead zone running back. Well, thank you very much, Dave. That was excellent. You want to take another shot here just to, plug your pluggables, let everyone know where they find you?
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter at Dave Kluge, and you'll see what I'm up to, and you'll either like me or you'll get really annoyed and block me after a couple of months.
Yeah, well, that's what I do. And then you can go on your own little podcast and you can quote things he said, not realizing it was him who you heard them from. And then, just look like a total jackass, but it worked out well. So it's funny, though, that both the things that were in my head of, God, I'm glad someone said it, it was you. And I couldn't remember if it was you or not, but you were very right. So, but that just means you got yelled at and called an idiot on Twitter because you tried to use common sense. So there's no room for that on Twitter. I don't know what you're thinking. So, all right. Well, this has been Sleepers, Breakouts, and Busts, the season finale with Dave Kluge. Once again, I am Aaron St. Dennis, the FF Mad Scientist, and this has been the Mad Science Lab podcast. Thanks again, Dave, for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Take care and have a great night.